Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's webinar from Annika Digital. It's myself, Anne Stanley. I apologise for the headphones, but I'm in the office and it's a little bit noisy this morning. I'd like to welcome Katie, who's our new head. Katie's going to be hosting with me in the future, so she's here to take control. Most important person in the room is obviously Mark, who's going to be doing the presentation. No escape, Mark. For those who are familiar with regulars, we do get a lot of regulars. Please say hi in the chat. We've already had a bit of a conversation about sound. So I think, hello, Chris, good to see you. Hello, Carol, I think you've got sorted your sound out now. And we'll quickly do a poll, and then I'm going to disappear. Katie's will be stalking in the background, answering any questions. And of course, you will get the video later on. You'll also notice there are some handouts if you want to go and get the slides, top right. But in the meantime, let's do the poll. So I'm going to... So because we started the poll before, Katie, I've got to put it back to the queue and then start polling again. So hopefully you can start seeing this now. Can you guys see it? Yeah, has the poll appeared? Yes. So what I have to do is I have to read the question and the answers out, because otherwise it doesn't appear on the video and nobody knows what we're talking about. So the question is, guys, do you use CRM or other methods for storing and managing customer data? So we've got several no answers and then mainly yes. So no, we don't use this at all. No, someone else manages this in our organization. Yes, but we just use a spreadsheet. Yes, we use CRM, but we don't maximize this enough. Yes, we use a free system. Yes, we use a paid system. Now, in theory, you can click more than one button. So a lot of you are saying, well, nearly half of you are saying, yes, we use CRM, but we don't maximize this enough. And about 30% of you are saying that you use a paid system. So that is the poll, which was nice and easy. It would be really useful if you could possibly put in the chat what software you're using, so we have a great idea of what you're actually doing. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass over to Mark. I'm going to disappear. And I think Katie's going to turn her camera off as well, and will reappear about 5:02. So good luck, Mark, and I look forward to seeing all your reviews later.
All the positive reviews, the positive.
Bye, guys.
Thanks. Right, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. So a couple of points just before we get started. I just want to make clear that we are not here pitching any particular packages or anything today. That's not our business. And because of that, I'm taking a fairly generalistic approach to everything that we are looking at. There's some practical tips, but also some perhaps what falls more into the arena of theory, etc. I am not a CRM consultant or anything along those lines, but I have worked on a range of CRM projects, often as liaison between users and, should we say, the IT bods, making sure that both speak the same language. So I come from that sort of background and stuff. So a little bit more about me. I've been involved in marketing for 26 years, which has mostly been marketing communications, but I've also run events, marketing campaigns as a whole, and also some print management. Been involved in quite a bit of market research and analysis, and across both the private and public sector, which are two quite different worlds even today. And along with that depth, I've crossed the breadth of SMEs and the corporate world, and I've been both sides of the fence, both agency and client. So I have an understanding of how both of those work. I'm just coming up to my 12 months at Annika. So I have my appraisal next week. So as mentioned, any positive reviews will help me greatly in that. Don't want to see myself out on the streets, etc., etc. My original degree was in modern languages, French and Italian to be specific. And one of my side interests is in astronomy. And if you take nothing else away from today, which I hope isn't the case, but I would please encourage you to have a look at the Wikipedia page for the pale blue dot, which for me is one of the best photographs ever taken, but I won't spoil any more surprise for you. So a little bit about us, some of the areas that we work in for Anika: construction industry, global distribution, logistics and supply, manufacturing and supply, and medical health and scientific. These are areas where we have plenty of experience and some specializing, but we're not exclusive to just those areas. And you can see some of our higher profile clients at the bottom there. So a quick overview of what we're going through today. So I'll do a little bit of a time warp and look at CRM systems through the ages, then some of the basics, some of the rationale for needing a CRM system or perhaps not, what you should look for in it. GDPR, it's been around for 2.5 years now, cannot ignore it, but obviously has strong relevance to CRM operations. How much are you looking to change within a CRM project? Or people often underestimate that. And then the more practical stuff of where we can go next. So a little bit of a history lesson. I'm hoping that a lot of this is relevant to a lot of you, but for some of you it may be new. So going back to perhaps mid-20th century, people would perhaps use something like a little black book just to keep all those contacts in. And then somebody came up with the idea that all of those pages should sit on a desk, and in the form of a Rolodex, which was quite ingenious for the time, although not that portable. Then 1980, the Post-it note was invented, which if your company didn't fork out for the original Post-it notes, you inevitably ended up pinning them to a board because the glue wasn't good enough or failed after one attempt. But a leap forward, even though it meant that stuff was left all over the place rather than coordinated. 1984, I think, was the launch year for the Scion organizer, which actually was the start of the smartphones that we hold in our hand today. That was the start of portable computing, really. And as I remember, it had a whole 2K of RAM in it and a single line display, as you can see there. But that was the start of what we have now. 10 years later, Apple launched the Newton, which was way ahead of its time. And I'd encourage you to look up the history of that because it's fascinating. Then mid-90s, Microsoft 95 launched, leap forward in terms of operating system, etc. And we all went spreadsheet crazy because they told us that we could. And then we realized that that had its own limitations in the sense that it was actually a flat database rather than a relational one. And then relational databases came along and we got a lot more information, more accessible, and a lot more analysis possible. And that kind of brings us to where we are now. But we have the connectivity of CRM has exploded, and its power has as well. So as I say there, CRM is nothing new, but its power has exploded. So you may already have a CRM mentality, but how do you best leverage it, if at all? So some of the basics. So CRM, customer relationship management, as I mentioned, came to the fore in the 1990s as technology progressed, essentially computing power and availability. But of course, since then has expanded hugely in its role and purpose. Still, its main use is for sales, customer service teams, tracking interactions between the organization and clients, current and potential. And the example I think most people would be aware of is being used in call centers, where of course the contact will vary from day to day. If I call up NatWest, I might be speaking to somebody about my mortgage one day and my savings the next day, but they will still need core information to hand, no matter who I'm speaking to, in which building, or possibly even which country. But I would encourage you to have a look at the Wikipedia page again on customer relationship management. It's quite an interesting history if you've got 5 minutes. So in my mind, CRM has has gone through a couple of evolutions, and this is sort of where we started and where the core still remains. Sort of these four areas that, as it shows, feed into one another. You may well have seen this this diagram before. It's quite a popular one. So wherever you start in this, but I would start with the top right of the sales. You can see that it's sales leading to orders. Support is an interesting area because I think there's this is where a lot of it is expanded in terms of it says manage cases, conduct trainings. I think there's developed knowledge base. A lot of your stuff you've got there is actually analysis and trend analysis, and I'll come on to that later. But all that information then, of course, leads into your campaigns. I wouldn't say it forms a database. I would say it continually feeds a database, but then leading back into sales. So that is the core operation and what most people will understand from CRM today. But once you start compiling and collating all that information, then you have an awful lot available in the back room, shall we say. So at the very least, you can start getting data reports out. So how many widgets did we sell last week? Which then naturally leads on to activity reports, which would be, okay, so we sold 1,000 widgets, but who sold them, who bought them, where did they buy them, when did they buy them, and what other factors are involved. And once you start compiling that over time, then you start looking at trends. Are we selling more widgets in the Northeast, the Southwest, or is it equal? And once you have trends, then you can start moving into some real analysis, bringing in other context factors, looking at why various things happened and feeding that back, and it becomes intelligence. And once you have that analysis and the trend, then you can start moving into forecasting, which opens up a whole new world, which to me, I would classify as it allows you to anticipate and can give you an advantage, a business advantage, a competitive advantage, however you want to look at it. But if there is something that you spot that others don't, there is a chance that you can exploit it. So that to me is where CRM went in its next evolution. And where we are now, all of that still remains. You still have the CRM core operation, you have the reporting around it, but now with integration with other systems, in particular marketing automation software, you have a whole range of other options, activities, etc. that can be taken. So for example, those mundane workflows that used to be manual can now probably be automated. It feeds into therefore your data management, campaign management, clients' own preferences. It used to be a case of, are your details still correct when you get an envelope through the letterbox? Now, same sort of thing is still done. Every so often when I log into Google, they'll check my my phone number, etc. Still all about managing preferences and that information. That, of course, then feeds into your sales, nurturing, the targeting, the segmentation, etc. And we're obviously now getting into the area where AI is helping. I wouldn't say it's yet making those decisions. It probably could, but do we trust it? But it's certainly assisting with that decision making. And that is a very interesting area as to where this is all going to go. So those for me are the evolutions that we've had. I'm sure you've seen sort of typical screenshots before, but here's one that I've taken from Microsoft Dynamics. One of the interesting points here is if you can make it out on the left-hand side, one of the common problems that people have with CRM is you have individual contacts at a single company, and then a company may have branches worldwide across the country, whichever it may be. So making sure that you have the right contacts allocated to the right accounts is one of those fundamental pieces that you will want to get right. Obviously, huge amounts of info there. Right in the middle, you've got logs of phone calls, but you can see a lot of the menu options, and MS Dynamics is a typical system. So the point there is CRM has evolved, and it will continue to evolve, of course. So why do we need a CRM system? Your companies, organizations will all be at different stages of their life cycle. So your needs will vary. You may be at startup, you may be in a growth, established and a mature phase, or looking for expansion or extension of life, diversification of your products perhaps. I steer away from the decline phase for obvious reasons, but your needs will change and vary according to which stage you're at. You will have different company cultures. Are you product-led, market-led, customer-led, maybe just by a few key customers? Or is it more a case of winging it? Is it more instinct? There are still many different company cultures out there, and having worked across a few, it's fascinating to see how many people listen to the customers but then ignore them, or try to follow the market, try to lead the market, etc. But again, bear that in mind when you're thinking about this, what you want from your system. You will offer different products and services, maybe fast-moving consumer goods, commodities, high-ticket items, and then you get into things such as what is the purchase frequency, and what are your sales and delivery mechanisms? How does that affect the relationship that you need and want to establish with your clients? Apologies for anybody that skipped breakfast, but I thought a smorgasbord would work well there as an image. And of course, everyone is following different strategies, whichever way they're going, hopefully always forwards, but that again will have a bearing on what you're looking to get out of your system. So those all add up to putting you in different need states. So it is up to you. There is no right, wrong answer, but it's up to you to decide if the case for a system is strong enough, whether it's a future consideration, it's something to pause, it's something to come back to in a year's time, etc., when different factors will have moved on. But don't just take the assumption we need something and dash for it. Look at where you are at. So be ready for your need to be less than, greater than, or different from your original expectation. Follow the analysis, follow the data. Don't always be just led by what you see others doing or hear others doing. Make up your own mind. So what to look for in software packages? So as I said, fairly generalistic. One solution does not fit all, of course. The analogy that I often use here is Excel spreadsheets, because I don't think I've ever met anyone who uses every single piece of functionality that is in an Excel spreadsheet. A lot of people will understand formulae and macros, etc., etc. But you can start getting into some really powerful stuff, but I've not met anybody that uses the whole lot. So the question is, would you want the same to be true of your CRM? Because that's going to cost you an awful lot more probably than your outlay for Excel. Do you want your product to be off the shelf? Unlikely that's going to work for many people, but a lot of the off-the-shelf packages are also customizable, so you need to understand how much customization you can undertake. That is an area where I would either speak to a few experts and or other companies that have gone through the similar experience, because it's the kind of limitation you do not want to find part way through. Or do you have the funds and time for a bespoke system, which is time consuming, and you need to make sure that you can warrant the benefits warrant the expenditure there. So some of the fundamental points to consider: who are the users going to be, and how many are there, and how will they access it, and what will those inputs be? And how will they come in? It's not just simply a case of mapping the data. It's about the practicalities of where that data comes from. And it goes back to also how much will be obtained by your colleagues and how much will actually come in directly from clients, for example. And what do you want the outputs to be? I go back to what I was saying about those reports, but also the benefits, the analysis, that forecasting, how far can you push the system? So again, look at your own situation, analyze where you're at, what you need, and where you want it to be. Fairly basic stuff, but it can easily be forgotten in the rush. So I've brought a few points together here that I just take these as sort of category headings. So look for the access and the connectivity. And by access, I'm not just talking about can we access it or a version of the system, for example, through phones or tablets or whatever it might be, and remote access, but also the security that is associated with that. I'm going to come on to GDPR, as you know, but the security of that access is absolutely critical. And connectivity. What else does the system connect with? Are there limitations to what can be done remotely? What's the availability of the system? If it's in the cloud, are there any down periods, maintenance periods? Communications. What communications does it log? Does it allow only external communications, the incoming and outgoing with clients, but does it also allow for the logging of internal communications? Linda might need to tell Brian to contact a particular customer about a certain topic when he's back from his leave. Does it allow that, or do you then have to switch and rely on your email, which once you're outside of the system, as we all know, it just adds a risk of complexity. How does the software integrate with the current situation? And I'm referring there in its widest form to the systems that you have in place and the people and the processes that you've got in place as well. But how does it work with the culture that you've got, with the processes that have been established around those systems? What needs to change? I will not name the organization, but I was working when I was doing my CIM a few years ago. A large banking group had sent a number of people on the class, on the training course, and they let us know that through various buyouts and mergers, etc., they ended up having to work with 7 legacy systems because they weren't able to integrate them all. And you can imagine in the banking world how critical that is, that all of that is synchronized, not just for financial regulation, etc., but just the speed of service. 7 systems would be a nightmare. So ongoing support and growth. How modular is the system? How much can you expand it? And what are the costs associated? What's the time associated with that? And what's the ongoing support that you have within a contract? If it's software as a service and it's cloud-based, how accessible is that support? Are you going to have to sit in a queue with a chatbot, or are you actually going to get through to a real person, etc.? Just so ask yourself those questions. And overall, I would say, how does the system or the systems you're looking at, how do they actually fit with your organization? I've seen a couple of projects in the past where because of other constraints such as finances, they were being forced to bend the system that they had to work with it. And it bends something too much and it will snap. So look at how that fits with all of those factors that I've listed above. So your CRM project does not have to be a large one. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, effort, and money, but it does need to be precise, because if you get it wrong from the outset, you will have an awful lot of backtracking to do, let alone all the goodwill that you'll have lost internally, and possibly the customers that you've lost externally. So take the time on the preparation. It will save you a lot of time later. So GDPR, General Data Protection Regulations. It's been enforced now for about 2.5 years. And a little bit of research on this. I found enforcementtracker.com, which is a great sounding website. Very useful, actually. And it shows that in the UK, there have been 5 successful prosecutions under GDPR. And a couple of these you may have heard of because of the organisations and the amount. 2 of them were over £20 million, one for Marriott Hotels and one for British Airways. But all 5 of those related to the security of processing of the personal data, which is one of the principles that I'll come into in a second. Europe-wide, there have been 842 prosecutions, which I think is about 2 every 3 days, if my math is right, somewhere around there. And as you can see, most of those, about a third, have been in Spain. So if you have a look at enforcementtracker.com, very easy website to use. You can filter it just by using the flags, but it's interesting to look at who's been naughty where. And the most recent one, the most high profile was a recent one, which you probably heard about, is Amazon in Luxembourg being fined £636 million, which I think Amazon are going to contest, but I'm not sure what mechanisms are actually available for them to contest it. I suspect they'll try and negotiate it down, but that's a lot of money, even to Amazon. So you've probably seen or even been on lots of courses related to GDPR, so I'll just run through the principles. So the data that you collect must be processed lawfully and transparently. It must be limited for the explicit legitimate purpose, so people have to know what you're using it for, and that purpose needs to be legal. It should be adequate, relevant, and restricted for that purpose. So you don't need to, if someone's booking to a hotel, you don't need to and mustn't ask them their marital status, inside leg measurement, whatever it might be. So it should be enough. It's Goldilocks. It's not too much, it's not too little, and only for that purpose. It needs to be accurate at the point of collection and kept up to date. It should be stored correctly for easy identification and for an acceptable duration. Processed securely, which, as I mentioned a moment ago, is the area where the 5 UK prosecutions have fallen down or been successful, depending how you look at it. And there is a section on the accountability of persons and organizations, data controllers, etc., data processors, as to so that people can know who's doing what. So I look at the data that you are working with. This is just my own take on it, and if it turns into some founding principle, then I'll claim the copyright on it. But the way I look at it is that you have 3 categories of data. They are not equal, but I would say foundation data, which is everything that you would need to collate to set up and have the business ready to go. So you'd have your supply details in place, what your marketing plans are, your product details, everything that you need to have in place before you open the doors, as it were. Then operational data, which is everything that is generated through the running of the business. So the contact details as they increase, as they evolve, as the order history gets added to accounts, all of that email correspondence, consent from the from clients, etc., changes in that consent. That's obviously the largest area, but at some point some of that will be archived, and it may no longer be in active or daily use, but it's still needed. Now I've put needed in inverted commas there, simply because you never know who's actually dictating that it's needed. So is it something that the CEO or the MD wants for sort of posterity's sake, or is it actually something you might need to dig back into, but only on occasion? So think about the rationale for why it is still needed. But there's some examples there, of course: former customers, old reports, out of date financial records, and there's good rationale for keeping a lot of that. But again, think about it, because you ask, if you've got old customers in there, would you be able to demonstrate that that is being kept for a reasonable length of time? So I'm going to focus on just a couple of the principles where I think they relate closely to CRM, but also some of the potential problems that they throw up. So accurate and up to date. Unless you're in the unfortunate position of having perhaps only one friend with one phone number on your phone, then I would contest that no data storage system, certainly a business one, is ever up to date. The moment that you think it's up to date, something somewhere will have changed. The difficulty is that you are responsible for the accuracy and keeping that data up to date. But the ownership, the person instigating, or the organization instigating those changes, may not let you know. So it may be 3 months before you realize, for whatever reason it might be, that a customer's address has changed, or they've changed the formatting of their email addresses. So there's a paradox between you're responsible for it, but you're not the one making the changes. So think about what are the processes that you have in place and that are needed so that you can do that to the best of your abilities. And again, it comes back to that checking of do we have your details correct? That's it in its most basic form. But there are probably other algorithms that you can run on the databases to look at how old certain pieces of data are. And if it was required, how would you actually demonstrate that those processes are in place? Because it's not the easiest thing to show, but if you can show that you've got your process documented and can be executed on an example, that puts you on much safer ground. I mentioned a moment ago, but worth exploring. So the duration of storage. So what constitutes a reasonable length of time? That will vary from business to business, person to person. So it's one of those deliberately vague terms, but leaves it open to interpretation. One of the examples that's in the legislation is it says, could you justify keeping a customer's details beyond a warranty period? Well, I think you could, because it's certainly if something's out of a warranty, then chances are that's where it's actually they're going to get close to reordering. So it would be nice to keep their order history beyond that. So that is something to consider. Backups. What is kept on your backups, and how long are they kept for? And I mentioned archives, but obviously you've got backups, hopefully, that are running at a very regular basis, but then backups of backups, and then you move into the archiving. So think about what is being kept there and where and how, etc. One of the things that may be relevant that you can consider is how to anonymize that old data. So you may still have those sales reports on the widgets sold, but it may come a point where you actually have to anonymize that, so it is simply down to where they were sold, when, how, etc. But I'm sure you all have a disaster recovery plan in place. My question there is, what data is needed within that? How do you run that as a cold site or a hot site that you can just start up in the worst possible circumstances of a fire, for example? But what data is being transferred to, for example, another site, and how is that working, especially in the cloud? How quickly can you access that, etc.? So not going to go into that in detail, but it's a point that is easily overlooked. And then the right to be forgotten, which has made the headlines a few times, usually with celebrities asking for stories to be removed from Google about them. Good quality data, which I'm sure is a founding principle for anyone that's running a CRM, but it does make it easier to identify for unsubscribing or removal purposes. Much better, easier to check that if, for example, you've ended up with multiple records of the same person, making sure that all of those are identified, because you can't just remove 3 out of the 4. You've got to find that 4th one. But there's again another paradox here. Once you've deleted a record, how do you prove that you've done that when it no longer exists? It used to be sufficient to archive it and, as it were, take it offline. That's no longer the case. So I did a bit of research on this, and an excellent answer I found was in the request for deletion, you acknowledge the request and explain the consequences, and you maintain proof so that if it's questioned, that you've got the correct processes in place. One of the fundamental pieces within the legislation is that once someone has exercised that right to request deletion, they can't then repeat it. So if you tell them that you've deleted their records, they have to take that at face value. They cannot come back, for example, 6 months later and say, by the way, I just want to check, am I still deleted off your system? Again, there's an irony there that if they're contacting you, then you're probably making a log of that contact, but we won't go down that path. But the answer comes back to explain to them that the data will be removed, there'll be no further contact, etc. And then say, if someone was to question that, show that you have got, again, that process procedure documented and actionable. So those are three areas where I think the CRM and GDPR overlap greatest. But I think it's worth spending some time on that, because it is that there's still a lot of vague understanding around GDPR. But for me, throughout my research, I've come to the conclusion that if you get your policies right, again, from the start, then you have got more than a decent leg to stand on. It is the legislation centers around actually showing that you are making best efforts. It is not there to try and trip everyone up. So I would say get those policies right, make sure they align with the legislation, obviously, make sure they align with your business operation, your model, how you capture, backup, transfer data, etc. And also align with reality. Like I say, it's about practical guidance rather than, I say, trying to criminalize every organization. So don't think of GDPR as a hindrance, more as a helpful guide or even an added level of assurance to know that you're doing the right thing. There is plenty of information out there. Some of it gets very legalistic very quickly, but there's good information on policy writing, etc. So you've decided to embark on a CRM project, but how much are you actually changing? So a few knots. CRM is not just a software upgrade or installation. It's not a data grab exercise. It's not just a sales ledger. It's not just a sales tool. It's not just a contacts database. And I would say this from every project that I've been involved in, CRM is about a culture change. It runs that deep. Certainly if you are making some fundamental changes to the organization. So on that point, a CRM project will only succeed if it's championed from the very top. You absolutely need that sponsor champion coming from the absolute top, which in the worst circumstances is a case of, well, the CEO is behind this, so you need to get behind it. But in actual fact, it should be the CEO, MD, whoever responsibility is actually about promoting the benefits, publicizing the changes, the obstacles, but what the positive outcomes would be. That's where you need that person essentially as a mouthpiece as well as an advocate. It should be consultative. You absolutely have to talk to users at all levels, from all angles, to get that buy-in. That is quite simple to say, but again, can be overlooked. But it was something I was certainly put in at all stages, whether it's within the prep stage, implementation, or the shakedown, the snagging afterwards. You've got to keep talking to people. Obviously, they will talk to you if they have problems. But if you're working with software that is customizable, find out what their needs are. It will take focus, it will take a lot of energy, and it will take grit. And I don't want to downplay that, and also don't want to be negative about it. But it will. There will be days when it's not plain sailing, and there'll be days when you have 7 successes in a row. But you have to be prepared for that. You have to be prepared for putting that time and energy in. And I say that if it's half baked, it'll go off half cooked, and it'll end up half finished, and it will be one of those stories that is told for the next 20 years of you should have been here when we tried to do this. And the reasons for the disaster are often quite obvious, but only with hindsight. So be ready for it in advance. Your project will need milestones and deadlines, and those should be marked and celebrated when they are hit, even if they are hit slightly late. But they should be, again, this comes back to your advocate in from the top, that should be say celebrated, marked as a occasion and a phase complete, etc. Now, where those deadlines and milestones are set will vary from project to project, but you do need to have them there, and absolutely make your best efforts to not miss them, because that sends out the wrong vibe, essentially. And once you get the negativity building around a project like this, it will spread like wildfire. So on similar point, it should be phased and possibly even modular if the software allows that. If it's a case of you can build part A, which will then feed into part B whilst not interrupting business operations, I would strongly recommend that. And within that, allow for the testing as well, because that will the whole point of trying to testing a system until it almost breaks or until it does break and finding out why it broke, absolutely valuable time there. So I would, if you can quarantine the project, but make it as live as possible, perhaps mirroring live data, but in an offline mode, that would be fantastic. And say if you can build, and I'm talking about building over perhaps even years, not just months or something. If you can add to as you go along, adding in extra functionality, that's ideal. So that's not been a long section, but it is absolutely important. I say it is all founded on culture change, and as I put there, you need to instill as well as install. It is CRM is it's customer relationship, but actual fact behind it, there's an awful lot of colleague and staff management as well. Never ever forget that. I've seen projects hit many bumps because people weren't spoken to at any point, actually, but that's another story. So where next? So there are several options available. There's a plethora of systems out there now, so I'm just going to pick a few examples. And essentially, whilst there's some overlaps, you've got three sort of categories. So within freemium, two examples are Zoho and Monday. HubSpot has a free version, but I understand that to get anything really valuable out of it, you do then have to start paying. There's a screenshot there from Monday.com, which takes a slightly different approach, which is more about the people and task management, but at the heart of it, it is still a CRM system. Some of the lower cost options are Pipedriver and SharpSpring. You have a shot there from SharpSpring, and you just need to do some, I say I'm not here to pitch any particular package, but some short research will actually start driving you in the direction, as well as awareness of other factors like budget that you might have available, as well as time and staff. And then top of the tree, Salesforce, the worldwide leader, and MS Dynamics, which is a system that I worked with a software house on an implementation at De Montfort University a few years ago. But that was great fun, learning how much could be customized and workflows and all sort of stuff in that. But of course, say it's a premium option. So some of the things to keep in mind that are slightly more practical. What are you aiming for? Certainly improved impact from the installation of the system. Greater, better, higher return on investment of the time that people spend on it, the effort that's put into it, and the money that it costs. It's blindingly obvious to say, but don't lose sight of it. Please don't lose sight of it. You want to reduce waste. It's the flip side of improving the profits, etc. But you can reduce the cost. minimize your opportunity cost. If you're targeting better, then you don't have to worry so much about what are the opportunities that we're missing because of the time that we are taking on this campaign, for example. If you've got better data, you get better analysis, you get better output. It's almost 101, but it all feeds into that greater efficiency, which then feeds back to your reduction in costs. All of this should be stuff that you are looking for to get from whichever system you're looking at. And from the customer's angle, or the customer field, you're looking for better retention of them, better personalization. And I should point out there that by better personalization, I'm not talking about just getting their salutation right. It's about the nature of offers, your messaging, the timing of your offers, all those other factors that, again, easily overlooked, but how personal is your offer to a particular client or set of clients. And better anticipation. I'll go back to that forecasting that I mentioned. But if you've got that data of buying patterns for certain products, certain clients, etc., you can anticipate that to the level that some of the better known organizations do. Although Amazon still seem to get it wrong with some of the stuff they send me. A couple of other key points. Interconnectivity I mentioned slightly earlier, but if you're looking at a particular system, and I go back to the example I mentioned about the banking group, how much do you need to integrate with legacy systems, those that are still in place, or those that may actually be storing data that is perhaps archived, but you want to actually retrieve and bring into the system? Is that viable, and is it necessary? But it's something to consider, that you may want to revitalize some of that data. And then with what you've got running at the moment, how does it integrate with the hardware that you've got? Is the hardware up to the task? Is there some software that you will need to keep running, or that will run alongside? And I'm thinking primarily of sort of accounting systems here that often are standalone, but the integration with CRM systems has improved massively. But again, I don't want to sound like Metropolis or something, but people are part of those systems. So how will it integrate with them? How much more training will you need to offer people? How long will that go on for? What will the content of it be? And what processes will have to change? There are those processes can get heavily embedded with people over the years. And again, mentioned earlier, marketing automation software. What does that allow you in terms of the expansion of your capabilities? And are those the capabilities that you are looking for? Does it mean redirection of effort, in that a process that had to be done manually simply because of legacy situation, does that no longer have to be done? How can that time and energy from a person or persons be redirected? Which leads to improved productivity. It's building that efficiency again, and letting the hardware and the software do a lot of the work for you. You're not just building a system, you're creating a data mine, which I'm sure you're all aware of, but think of the granularity that you can actually get to. So you might look at the number of the widgets that you've sold in a specific region over a set period in response to a certain ad that was personalized and tracked, and of course reportable. This is what came to the fore probably, I think, in the early 2000s, once CRM had settled in properly, was hang on, we can find an awful lot of information here, but think about how granular you want that to be, and how make sure that you've got that in from the outset. Turn your data mine into a gold mine. It's no mistake that one of the CRM systems out there is called Goldmine. So you're wanting, yes, you want to be able to retrieve accurate information, and you want to report accurately on historical and recent events, but those are the bare minimum. Then you can start looking for those trends that I mentioned earlier, and you move into the forecasting based on that knowledge and extrapolation. Integrate the system for that efficiency I mentioned a moment ago, that leads to identifying where you've got that competitive advantage. And that's what you can then exploit for that commercial gain. And that's an iterative process as well, because you won't be able to just sit there and exploit that. Amazon have done it with their data for a long time, but there's a lot of people that have followed that and copied it and are now bettering it. So it's an iterative process to keep looking for those improvements. This was a very good site that I found that has got some good comparison and analysis, lots of sort of white papers, etc., on the world of CRM. So I would recommend a visit there wholeheartedly. Right. So on to the slightly more practical stuff. So where next, from the point of view of, let's say you've made a decision or almost made a decision on what the system that you're looking for. I've always said start at the end, which I take as essentially reporting. So what report, it goes back to what I was saying, but what are the outputs that you need? What are the reports that people are actually going to need to see, and on what frequency? What do they actually, how much analysis, etc.? How do all these reports tie in with your KPIs? You may be able to churn out data upon data, but actually does it tally with what the KPIs of the business are? And how will they be presented? I mentioned frequency. What's the format? Are they is it the old style boardroom, or is it here's a link, please have a look, if you've got any questions let me know? But reporting these days isn't just enough. We mentioned AI. It's going to be very interesting to watch how that plays an increasing role. But where else can you obtain data? What is your social monitoring? What are the other factors that you should feed in as part of the context? In essence, excuse me, as I put, no CRM is an island. It never ever operates in isolation. So think about other areas where you can obtain information that is relevant and pertinent to what you're presenting. Then move on to the middle. So the data. I mentioned so the types of data earlier. So what data do you need to capture? How are you capturing it? How much is automated? How much is manual? How much involves an actual contact with clients? And where is it coming from? Where is it currently stored or recorded? Again, existing systems, legacy systems. How much are you going to have to transfer? Who will do the transfer? How secure is that transfer? And is that data actually recorded, or is it just company law, or that's the way things have always been done around here, or you need to speak to so and so in the warehouse? They're the only person that knows how to operate that system. Whatever, something on those lines. But you need to question: is that information, if it's more along the lines of hearsay, is it true or correct, and therefore need to be included or not? I mentioned, the transfer of the data. How will you move it? How long will it take? How easy is it to get hold of it, especially if it's in those legacy systems that, does somebody still know the password to get into them? And also, going back to what I was saying about the granularity, where do you stop? You need to know what you're needing to put into your new system to make sure that you're not doing just that data grab exercise that I mentioned. You need to know what you're bringing over. And then I finish at the start of where are we now, and look at the widest possible picture. So what is our current situation? I talked about situation analysis. Do we have budget for this, or is the budget best spread? Do we have a modular option to go for? What's the vibe within the company, the organization? Not just the culture, but what's the vibe? Is the timing right for this internally, and also is the timing right externally from the macroeconomic view? How big is the gap from here to there, and how will you break down those phases? Again, that will come down to your own setup, your own plans, but I would say that the size of the solution that you're putting in, once you've done that situation action, that influences the size of the problem that you're facing. And again, I put problem in inverted commas because it's perhaps not the best term, but you do need to see it as a challenge to overcome. So my final thoughts. I would start at the most basic. Is CRM what we need? It's not a magic pill. It's not, despite what you'll read from numerous sales pitches, it is not the cure for all ills. So make sure that it's actually something that you need to get into. Where possible, I would start small and build up. Modular if possible, certainly phased. Don't forget that customer relationship management, it is also the customer, even more so today, is managing the relationship as much as you are. In fact, I would say the pendulum starts swinging to they are doing more of the management. So bear that in mind, that it's not just you managing customers, it is as much the other way around. And when I was in a previous life doing some systems analysis training, I found this line which has stuck with me, which certainly pertinent here. Data becomes information, information becomes knowledge, knowledge becomes advantage. Turn a spreadsheet of numbers into your competitive advantage through the right processing, the right storing, the right analysis. That for me is that's how I always approach that sort of what are we getting out of this? Certainly when I'm looking at it for clients, how can I provide them with the advantage that comes from the data that we are compiling on their behalf? So any questions? And I believe Katie's got a couple more slides to run through. You're muted, Katie. No, still muted.